Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the fourth and final installment this year in our Technology Horizons webinar series. My name is Aaron Pereira. I'm the Managing Director of Client Partnerships in WattSpeed here at the University of Waterloo. Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge that at the University of Waterloo, much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations, that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. As we begin, there are a few logistical items that I'd like to cover. You may have noticed we are recording today's session. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with colleagues, the recording will be made available to all registrants in the next few days. We're also going to have a lengthy Q&A at the end of today's session. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, please add them to the questions pane. To those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, thank you so much for sharing those with us. We will try our best to cover as many questions as we can in the time we have. If you're not already familiar with WattSpeed, we are a new unit at the university, created specifically to help professionals, organizations, and executives keep pace through disruption, with education that's designed and delivered by our faculty and trusted partners. These days, it feels as though new developments or factors outside of our control surface and disrupt the status quo. Whether it's technology, politics, or climate change, to name a few, there's no such thing as business as usual anymore. So how do we navigate and keep pace with change? Well, that's what we'll delve into as we consider the quantum landscape. I'd now like to introduce our moderator and speaker for today. Our moderator, Sherry Shannon Vanstone, is the founder, president, and CEO of Profound Impact Corporation. Sherry is a serial tech entrepreneur and a trailblazer in information security. She led startups to successful exits in Silicon Valley and the Toronto-Waterloo Tech Corridor, with 2 IPOs and 2 acquisitions. Her work as a cryptologic mathematician with the US government provided the foundation for a career in information security, including senior leadership positions at MasterCard and a number of information security startups. Sherry was also the catalyst in the commercialization of elliptic curve cryptography, which is now utilized to provide security in every mobile device worldwide. You'll see Sherry a little bit later during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Our speaker for today is Dr. Michele Mosca. Michele is one of the world's leading authorities in quantum computing and associated cyber risks. He started University of Waterloo's efforts in quantum computing in 1999, where he is full professor in the Faculty of Mathematics. He is the co-founder of CryptoWorks 21, a training program in quantum-safe cryptography, and he is also co-founder of Evolution Q Incorporated, which provides services and products that enable organizations to evolve their quantum vulnerable systems and practices to quantum-safe environments. Michele, over to you.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. Looking forward to these brief opening remarks and the discussion afterward. The key message I hope we all take home is that Canada's extremely well positioned to play a leading role in advancing quantum technologies and importantly bringing cutting-edge solutions to market domestically and internationally. In order to do that, we have to continue to drive quantum innovation and, very importantly, its adoption. That's easier said than done, but it's a great challenge I think we can and must tackle together. So why is quantum so powerful, so disruptive, something we can't or shouldn't ignore? Simply put, it comes down to the fact that if you try to describe a simple bit, the physical instantiation of a bit, a two-state system, right, in a full quantum mechanical treatment, you realize there's an exponential complexity there, which makes it really hard to simulate even a handful of quantum bits. And quantum computing and quantum technologies is really that shift in mindset from, gosh, these are really difficult and challenging to simulate with our classical systems, to what if we build technologies that harness all this complexity, all this richness? Can we maybe do things we previously thought we couldn't do, or do them much better? So more specifically, one quantum bit, it's just a two-state system like a regular bit, except treated quantum mechanically. You need to keep track of what the quantum amplitude of 0 is and of 1 is. So you need to keep track of 2 numbers to sufficient precision. Not so bad. But if you have 2 bits, well, there's 4 configurations, 0001, 1011. You need to keep track of 4 amplitudes. Not so bad. 20 bits, that's over 1 million configurations. Okay, you could do that on today's PCs, even today's phones. 40, you need 1 trillion numbers. That's starting to push the limits. A few dozen quantum bits, a few hundred quantum bits, there isn't enough matter in the known universe to simulate that quantum computer using a regular computer. Right. So then this poses this immense challenge and opportunity. Can we find useful things to do, useful things we can compute with these quantum computers that we never thought we could? And that's an aggressive, ongoing activity that Canada, alongside many partners internationally, is at the leading edge of. And it really has left, it's no longer, again, there was tremendous leadership from the academic and research community to get us to this point. It started off as undirected research that was, ignored, even ridiculed, to suddenly being one of the most important topics in computing and physics and engineering. And it's part of industry. It's still a critically important role for academia, but we're seeing many important breakthroughs in the US and Europe, around the world, toward the development of a stable, working, large-scale quantum computer. We already have devices that are big enough that we can't simulate them on a regular computer, even a supercomputer, without taking an exorbitant amount of resources. And we're really going to reach that cusp where it's just completely infeasible to try to simulate it in fact, I mean, today's devices, if you really want to truly simulate 1,000 qubit computer, it's absolutely impossible on a regular computer. And there's, these are some roadmaps from some industry giants around the world. Some of these were published 5 years ago, and you notice they're tracking. They've achieved in 2023 what they said back 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, they were going to do. Again, several of the major industry players have delivered really audacious roadmaps for building more and more powerful quantum computers. What do we know we can do with these? Like with any new disruptive technology, we never really know at the beginning, or we're only really capturing a small piece of the potential. Like when the internet was first emerging for most people in the 90s, did we imagine its uses today? Or when PCs and computers were coming on the market decades ago, we never imagined how they would revolutionize our lives. Or when wireless communication became possible over a century ago, we never imagined smartphones and so on. So for the most part, we don't know yet. But what people are aggressively there's already really exciting promise is in various industrial optimization problems, helping researchers advance the frontier of science, many applications or potential applications in material science, healthcare, energy, finance, and so on. And all of these sectors are taking very serious, aggressive looks and seeing many promising opportunities there. It can also help us do cryptography, protect our digital infrastructures, our digital assets much better. And that'll be the focus of what we're going to talk about today. So what this means for something this disruptive that is basically ready for technology showtime now, it's becoming available, it's becoming more and more available, more and more powerful, can already do things we couldn't do before and only getting more powerful very rapidly. Every organization, every country needs a serious strategy, a serious plan, both to understand and harness the positive potential of this technology, but of course, mitigate the known risks when adversaries have their hands on these technologies. So it's a natural thing we must do to be successful as businesses and as nations and so on. For a lot of the quantum potential, again, it's still, while we've come a long way over the last few decades, there's still much, much more progress to be had. But we're already at a point where it's really critical that we start doing what Jim Collins and Hansen call firing bullets and then cannonballs, right? They've studied empirically organizations that drastically outperform their competitors, and this is one of the practices they do. So we can, as a company or as a country, come up with a long list of reasons and excuses why we're not doing this and be the ones who are outperformed by those who are doing this. It's really a choice we have to make, right? And these are low cost, low risk, low distraction, projects and initiatives but they really set the groundwork for launching very impactful cannonballs. And you can't make up that lost ground later and just suddenly magically get all that wisdom and experience and know-how and know where to launch, with a wait and see approach. So this is really critical for us to do if we want to benefit for all the great potential that we've created. And Canada has really been a world leader, world recognized leader in creating this opportunity. We now need to demonstrate that we're also a leader in utilizing these opportunities and exporting the capabilities to other nations around the world. One of the reasons I'm so confident this will have tremendous impact on an increasing number of industries is because back in 1994, we saw it have an absolutely astronomical impact on what we now call cybersecurity, on cryptography. The way we secure all of our communications today, or virtually all of our communications today, is through mathematical methods that rely on some math problems being hard. Right? And when you do HTTPS, right, that S requires certain mathematics problems, such as taking a large integer and factoring it, to remain really, really hard. If adversaries could solve that problem, they could break the codes, they could read secrets, they could impersonate people. With IoT and so on, they can take over devices, and et cetera, et cetera. So over time, the impacts of breaking cryptography have gotten worse because we've relied on cryptography more and more, because it's such an enabler, it's such a value creator. But on the flip side, that means we need to protect it more. So back in 94, we realized quantum computers would just almost instantly break. It's not literally instantly, but with effort, that's not much more than using the codes, break these codes that underpin today's economy, basically. So that's, on the one hand, an illustration. This stuff is really powerful. We should look for other interesting, useful things to do with it. On the other hand, it creates an imperative in order for the advent of larger and larger quantum computers to be a positive milestone for all of us. We must first, of course, mitigate this impending cyber threat. When do we need to act as individuals, as companies, as societies? Well, it depends. You have to look at each information system, each information asset, and look at what's the shelf life of the information. Because some information is ephemeral. It's only needs to be secure for a day, others 10 years, others much longer. You have to look at your migration time. It's actually really complicated to retool your cryptography. It's not like changing a light bulb. It's more like rewiring all the electrical wires in your house, right? It's a very disruptive thing that takes a long time to do properly. So there's a long migration time. Right? And then, of course, what's the collapse time? How many years before adversaries can exploit this powerful quantum computer to break those codes, steal the information, impersonate people, and so on? Well, for that migration time, we're stuck with the quantum vulnerable code. So we're communicating secrets, sensitive information that has another X years of shelf life. So if the migration time plus a shelf life is longer than the collapse time, you already have a problem today. And so organizations have to go through all their information assets, look at their X's and Y's and Z, and decide which ones need to be acted upon most urgently. What is Z? The collapse time? Well, we don't know. That's a perfectly correct and useless answer. And colleagues from industry, I remember a colleague from Certicom many years ago said it'd really help if you give us some kind of timeline. Of course, we didn't know. But over the years, I've started articulating a risk-based timeline, because that's really what matters. What's your risk tolerance? And then I'll tell you, is that roughly the likelihood that most people think of this happening in 5 years or 10 years? So I have my own personal estimates, but we also have been conducting surveys of the world's dozens of the world's thought leaders and all the different aspects of building a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, and ask them, what do you think? All things considered, because there's so much uncertainty here, what would you bet, right? What is the likelihood of this happening in 5 years? Now, most selected less than 1%, but over a third or so selected higher, greater than 1%, greater than 5%, some even greater than 30%. When you average all that, you get these intervals here. So you can decide, your organization, your country, is this particular system, information asset, can I take a 5-10% chance? If not, you really need to target a 5-year timeline. What about 10 years? Can you handle a 25% chance? If not, you have to target a 10-year timeline. And I think most organizations are in that less than 5 or less than 10-year horizon for their really important systems. So there really is an urgency here. I know for many people that seems like, oh, that's a long time, but migration times are generally more than 5 or 10 years. Right? So strategies, there's a saying that strategy is 10%, success is 10% strategy, 90% execution. And Katie Taylor once said, an execution is 90% planning, 10% doing. You might be able to put off the doing, the actually turning on the new systems for 5 to 10 years. But there's that 10 years of planning and preparation and testing, getting your supply chain ready, getting your trusted suppliers in place, getting your workforce ready to do that doing in 5 years or 10 years, whatever that number is. Right? But we can't call a timeout. That's not how it works when people are attacking you. You don't get to call timeout and say, wait, give me time to prepare. So it's really essential we get this planning done in advance. If we're ready, then we have the talent, we have a trusted supply chain, and so on. People retain confidence in using the systems and the people running the systems. If, again, we would have migrated using technology lifecycle management, so it's not very expensive if it's part of your usual upgrade lifecycle. If it's a crisis we manage in the end, where are you going to get that talent? It's going to be such a huge demand. Systems will fail because you're rushing your software migration. No attackers. Right? Other systems will fail because when you rush a deployment, you're going to make software mistakes that adversaries can exploit, these so-called zero-day attacks. And then, of course, you'll also have adversaries using quantum computers for the systems that haven't migrated in time. And again, you risk losing trust in the systems and in the institutions. So but there's a greater lesson here, and this is maybe one of the most important lessons we really need to learn from all this. If it weren't for quantum computers telling us that in theory we can break these codes, we'd still just be happily using these codes without having any readiness, any serious readiness to change them if they're broken. Because what if instead of scientists in the open saying, I could break this with a quantum computer in 30 plus years, somebody just breaks it and it's broken now? We're absolutely unready for that. How did we get to this ridiculous point where we're dependent on it, but not ready in case it's broken? Well, slowly, step by step, right? The internet was this cool tool for, researchers and so on. It wouldn't have been a big deal if it was broken, to suddenly we're using it for kind of important things, to just about everything now. And security was kind of bolted on later. It's been a push to get security by design, but we never really thought through, what about resilience by design? What about if this is broken, then what? We're stuck right now with a system with very limited resilience and readiness in case of an unexpected break. Right? And again, I can't say how lucky we've been, because the breaks of cryptography in the modern era have either been like, Shor's algorithm with quantum computing, where it wasn't implementable for many years until you had a quantum computer, or the SHA-1 break by our colleague in China, where it took about a decade before people could implement the attack, or they were attacks on laptops in a weekend, but on codes that were about to be deployed, but weren't quite, deployed in any sort of large scale way. That's just luck, that every time something was broken, it either was a slow break or it was not a significant system. And we can't count on luck for something this absolutely critical. So we need to move from, security to also having resilience, right? So what's the alternative to these beautiful public key methods we rely on today? Not in instead of, but in addition to. So we have at least 2 different ways to exchange secrets. And we might prioritize one over the other, but this other one is there protecting our more critical systems and available to be scaled up in case something goes wonky with the first layer and we need a bit of time to repair it, right? And so quantum can actually help provide some of these additional layers of defense, because one of the wonderful properties of quantum physics is if you observe a quantum system, you must disturb it. And it's a quantifiable disturbance. This gives us an almost magical new way to establish shared cryptographic keys through untrusted environments. And it moved from an idea in '84, invented by Gilles Barsard at the Université de Montréal and Charlie Bennett at IBM, to rudimentary implementations, to more academic implementations, to large-scale commercial deployments. Here we have tens of thousands of kilometers of deployments across China, including satellite links for very long distances. Right. So there's great opportunity here to also leverage these new emerging quantum technologies, including long-distance quantum communication networks, to help build a more secure, resilient economy and society. And just to reemphasize, we have to move as the stakes, as we count on cryptography more than ever before, and we'll continue to rely on it even more as we go forward. We have to change our mindset. It's really hard, but we absolutely must. From, again, back in the old days, we had no security because we didn't really need it. Now we know we need security, but it's a very fragile thing, in that if a smart mathematician figures out how to solve a math problem, you can really see widespread attacks, downtime, controlling of operational systems, and so on. A very systemic, widespread, calamitous sort of situation. So we really need to move to resilience by design. So again, one layer offers you security, 2 layers of defense starts to offer you resilience, and that's something we need to do, and where Canada is really well positioned to be a global leader in protecting Canada and also exporting all those capabilities internationally. Where do you start in this journey? Because people often just get overwhelmed and then paralyzed by all the complexity, and I don't even know who to ask and where to start. But that's changed now. Many very credible organizations, and one of them is the Canadian Forum for Digital Infrastructure Resilience, has been convening for 3-4 years now, studying this, looking at case studies and producing best practices and sharing them with Canada and around the world. So I would urge Canadian organizations to leverage these best practices. It includes really simple low-hanging fruit, such as, here's a questionnaire, 8 questions to ask your vendors about their quantum readiness posture. And here's some other questions you could ask your third parties. When you're evaluating your third-party risk, here's some questions that have already been discussed and sampled and used already by people who've been studying this problem for a long time. So you don't have to start from zero. There's a lot of help out there to get you started on this journey. Another important point is Canada is very strongly embedded with all of our international partners. All right, we've sort of created this opportunity together. We can really blaze the trail in translating these inventions and ideas and innovations and technologies and adopting them and exporting them around the world. So it's really an exciting time to be in this field. Again, just to recap, as companies, as an industry, as a country, we need to continue to double down on our readiness for this exciting new quantum age, figuring out and actually benefiting from its potential, and being at the forefront of mitigating all the risks intrinsic with quantum technology. So it's been a pleasure to give this quick introduction to the topic, and I'm really looking forward to a discussion with my longtime mentor and friend, Sherry Shannon Vanstone.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me to be here for this conversation with you. And I see we have some questions from the audience, so you want to get started?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
Let's start with one that I think many people have been thinking about, and Tim's asked it. How will quantum technology impact the individual, the average individual or organization, individuals that are participating in this webinar today?
So it'll impact us at many different levels. There's the obvious direct impact, like as one technology that's spun out of my research group is going to enable like faster, better, cheaper MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. So as a patient, you'll have a faster image, there'll be shorter queues, right? And you'll get a better image. So it'll improve your own personal health care. Many of these examples will, of course, most of them I think are still to be discovered as people go through this exercise of finding the applications of quantum technologies, but we already know of some exciting ones that will directly impact how it'll directly impact the individual. It'll also impact our jobs. Like you might be the one running those MRI clinics, right? So it'll change how you do your job, and you'll probably be happier to do them quicker and be able to treat more patients. Or you might be the business that owns the MRI clinics, right? Or you might be the manufacturer of this equipment. And the impact could be positive if you're adopting the disruptive, new, better technology, but it can also be negative if your jobs are displaced if you're not able to embrace the new, better technologies. So there's also an important sort of economic, greater economic impact. And if as a nation, we're laggards in adopting quantum technologies to increase our productivity, that will mean less revenue to pay for roads and schools and healthcare. But if we're early adopters and can boost our productivity, then we'll have more resources to be able to build a strong Canada.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Scott from Autodesk that asks, given the Gartner's hype cycle, aren't we in the early stages of quantum computing?
I guess I would start by first of all segmenting quantum technologies more broadly, and because there's also different types of quantum computers, and there's quantum sensing, and there's many different kinds of quantum sensors. There's quantum communication, so they're all at different stages of their technological maturity. And then with regards to where are they in this so-called hype cycle, I think it's important to remember we're not passive bystanders in these cycles that technologies inevitably take. We're active participants, so we can actually accelerate, we can shape that curve quite a bit. The other point I would make is, we can't just, again, be passive bystanders, and then when it's finally at the exciting part, just show up and say, hey, how can I benefit from all this technology? That might not work. Like, you might not have access to it. Those jobs might be lost to other jurisdictions and so on. So it is important. Like, we all have our role to play as technology goes through its maturity process, and we need to make sure to embrace the appropriate role at the appropriate time.
A question that I'm certain is on everyone's mind is about this possible connection or relationship, or however you want to say, of AI and quantum computing. And in particular, over the last year, we've seen the fast pace of AI advancements and adoption. How may AI affect quantum computing and vice versa?
Yeah, it really is in both directions, right? Because AI, machine learning, and so on can help at every level of the quantum technology stack. It can help us design better bits, understand, characterize noise better, build, design better materials, right? And automate a lot of what we're doing manually at the low level. It can help us, write the code or design the code and optimize the code that compiles the quantum algorithms. It can help us, maybe discover and optimize, discover new quantum algorithms. It could maybe automate the matchmaking between real world industry problems and the quantum algorithmic tools, because that right now is being done manually by a really, really small set of people. And maybe AI can kind of accelerate finding, as we come up with new algorithmic primitives, well, which industries will this impact? That's still a very manual exercise. So I could see AI impacting the full supply chain of quantum technologies. On the flip side, like, why is it like an overnight success that was decades in the making? Obviously, the two big players are the availability of large amounts of data now, but also tremendous amount of computing power.
Yes.
There's many computing challenges to make AI possible, and that will make it even better. And so the algorithmic power of quantum computers has the potential to speed up different aspects of the computational tools we use to make AI possible. It's still work in progress. Some things are more speculative than others, but that's certainly a great potential that we need to. And Canada's super well positioned to be a world leader because we're world leaders in quantum computing and AI. Like, we really it's ours to lose in terms of being a world leader and how they impact each other.
Certainly agree with that. Kelly from Autodesk asked, NIST is in the process of releasing a set of post-quantum encryption methods, which have been many years in development. What will it take organizations to adopt these formats, and will it be enough? I'd like to just draw from some of my experience in the standards world. There was elliptic curve cryptography, which was theorized and verbalized in 1985 by Victor Miller and Neil Koplitz. And then it took 10 years, so the 85 to 95, to take it from a science project to reality. Then in 1995, it took about 10 more years to get into all these standards, ISO, ANSI, and others. And then it took probably 10 more years before we really saw it deployed in the BlackBerry and the mobile and smartphone scenarios. So what do you think about NIST and what they're doing and how long it may take?
Yeah, I mean, much of what I learned in this space actually learned from you and your collaborators. And I said, okay, how did you do that with ECC? And we've been replicating that. And that's why we proactively engage with standards organizations, was those kind of lessons we learned from you. And a lot of the open source, we started the Open Quantum Safe Toolkit, and that was, you provided a lot of guidance there. Because I was like, how do we, and as I learned from the people who've done this before, I'm like, there's a lot of work to be done here. And I've been focusing on the different building blocks. One of them is making the tools available to people, because somebody's going to write these algorithms, these cryptographic codes, but then they're going to be used in payment systems and other things. And these people they don't need to write the cryptography. They just need to use it and apply it. So that's a highly non-trivial project. So we got it into their hands. People who aren't experts in implementing cryptography, but are experts in using it, we got it to them right away. But it's a long, complicated, life cycle that is measured in decades. Is it enough? So it's going to be hard. Is it enough? Well, no, because we've already learned from history that eventually we replace these codes with other ones. Now, we've been lucky in that the ones we've used significantly, we've had a long lead time to replace. And actually, I mean, obviously, the founders of Certicom, my old mentors, they broke a code back in the early 80s as it was being produced in hardware, right? It was going to be deployed, but they broke it doing some different academic problem. They weren't even trying to break it. They were trying to solve that math problem for some other reasons. And so there was an unexpected break. And fortunately, that never happened with any of these widely deployed schemes. So we need two other things in addition to this really hard process of reestablishing the current first layer of defense. We need to be much better prepared. We can't just say, okay, great, that was over with, call me in 20 years when we have to do it again. We need to continually keep track of, we have to manage our cryptography proactively, like we manage all our other software nowadays, and know what cryptography we're using. If ever something is broken, we know exactly where to go, and we have a reasonable path to fixing it. The other thing we need is a second layer of defense. And, if this is broken and maybe it's going to take us weeks or months to fix, what's going to keep the lights on in the meantime? So we need to deploy things like quantum cryptography or other symmetric key type schemes to keep the
you're
lights
saying
on.
do it in parallel, do it as a second layer of defense.
Often people get embroiled in, well, my solution is better than your solution. I'm like, no, they're different, and that's good. They're ideal complementary layers, because if one's broken, this one's pretty different. It's less likely to also be broken.
Yes.
So I see them as complementary in addition to each other.
Yeah. And the same thing with elliptic curve and RSA. Even when I was at MasterCard and we were working with trying to deploy elliptic curve, we said it's just make sure that your systems that you're building we could switch out the algorithms and make the algorithm agnostic, which is not easy to do.
Yeah.
We have a question from Mark, and says, can you provide a view of how quantum computing will impact cybersecurity efforts, as it seems that criminal organizations also benefit from tech leaps? I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the elliptic curve story again, when it was deployed early on and then widely and RIMS products, Research in Motion, in the BlackBerry. And we confronted the same problem because the president of the United States was using the BlackBerry because it was the highest level of security. Because who else was using the BlackBerry? The criminals. So we, in that situation, the technology's there, and either the criminal and the good guys and the bad guys can use it. So your comments on that?
I think the decision has been made, and it was the right decision, that we need strong cryptography out there to protect, honest, good citizens, right? Because not having the available strong cryptography means we're all exponentially more vulnerable. Sometimes it's at odds with law enforcement, but not really fundamentally. Law enforcement is not done by breaking the cryptography. It's done at a much higher level of the technology stack. So actually deploying this better cryptography to replace the current to-be-broken cryptography doesn't fundamentally change that art. But I don't think I think that's the choice is we must have strong cryptography in order to protect. You can't just say, well, let's all leave our doors unlocked.
Yes.
So,
Mhm.
you know, we can go look at, you know, get into the houses of bad people. It's going to be a net negative. Not again, easier said than done. And I know there's a lot of non-trivial issues with that. But overall, I would say for cybersecurity, it's going to be a net positive because it's driving us toward a stronger cyber immune system.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you were advocating agility like so many years ago, and you know, were people really listening? Maybe, but quantum comes along and makes a really strong case
Yes.
for why we need this. So we are starting to get cryptographic agility. We are going to get defense in depth. We are going to manage our cryptography better. So we have a stronger cyber immune system, and we wouldn't have done all those things if it weren't for this quantum threat. But fortunately, the quantum threat was years in the future, because if it was right away, then it would have been a catastrophic event.
Yes.
So it's a sweet spot. I call it a blessing in disguise because it's real enough to motivate, you know, a much more secure approach to our digital platforms, but not real enough to crush them all and
Yes.
to do all sorts of widespread damage. And then in terms of the cat and mouse game of, you know, because adversaries can maybe use quantum computers to, you know, better analyze data and find, you know,
Mhm.
and automate cyber attacks, which is happening more and
Yes.
more, but then we can automate the cyber defenses better. So
Yes.
we're going to have a bit the continuation of some of the cat and mouse games we see. But obviously we want to, on the defense side, be as far ahead as we can be.
Yes. Ah. With all the hurdles you mentioned, are we ready? Are there people able and willing to work in this field? Are there private sector and other government resources online available? Let's answer that third question last, but are we ready and are there people able and willing to work in this field?
There definitely are. We just have to give them the opportunities and mandate to do it, right? We often talk about the brain drain. Well, I don't know anyone who would leave Canada to go somewhere else if they could do something similar here. And so I think that we really just need to seize the opportunities, and then we'll definitely have the talent to meet today's challenges. There is a bit of foresight in a lot of the cybersecurity migration needed, but like Quantum Safe Canada, we've done an analysis of all the skills that will be needed by the workforce, and we just need to be proactive to start preparing these curricula.
But
You know,
overall, right now,
yeah.
there's a deficit in workers, even in the cybersecurity area as it exists today, and the cyber increased and all the time. So, do you see programs? Do you see curriculum? Do you that's being developed now or being offered now that's helping in this area?
It's ramping up. Like different universities and colleges and other programs are having more and more specialized cybersecurity training initiatives, but there's a supply and demand problem, and there's often a time lag.
Yes.
Because if you wait till the demand is acute, well, you know, you can't just spin up a program, launch it, train the people, and have them out the door in 6 months. That takes years. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
do
well,
want
what
to
I've
get
seen
ahead of
is
it.
that a lot of retraining going on in
Yeah.
this, where people don't have necessarily a math degree
Yeah.
and you know, one's a cryptographer and all that, being trained in this area. So we're drawing from a more than just a STEM-based background.
Yeah, that's a really important development I've been seeing. Because if you talk to all our, you know, really thought leader friends in cybersecurity and say, what was your background? You know, I did a history degree. I did
Yes.
all sorts of eclectic, and that's a really powerful thing for cybersecurity because, like, because adversaries, like, they don't play by the rules, right? They'll come in any way they can, and you really need to have a holistic, creative view of how they might be
So
attacking
that's
us.
cybersecurity in general, but
Yeah.
what about in the quantum area? Are you seeing ramped up in that area too, as far as curriculum and training?
There are, it's still, there's a lot of academic programs I'm seeing ramping up. We're starting to see growth in the undergrad curriculum, and we're seeing more and more development of professional training programs.
Yes.
I was just talking to one colleague in industry, and he's been following, you know, one of the universities has been catering some professional education. He's been taking he's been absorbing everything he possibly could. And he's not a scientist. He's a business person, but wants to stay on the cutting edge. So there's more and more resources out there. So if the demand kind of signals itself, then the supply we can you can
Well, in this
supply it.
100-year life cycle that our young people are starting entering into, they're going to learn and relearn and
Yeah.
retrain, and that's just it's going to be normal. It's going to become the norm.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's move on here. What complementary skills should professionals develop to stay relevant and leverage opportunities in quantum computing era, particularly those who are not, as we said, don't have the background in data science or mathematics? What other skills?
Yeah. Well, using generative AI, helps because there's so much knowledge out there. It's just hard to do the research.
Yes.
So, that's one of the tools you can use, but how can you quickly scan? But I think in the modern era, we're seeing figure out how you get information you trust. So build those trusted sources and not get sucked into, because we're all vulnerable to fake news.
Yes.
Like we always think the other person is vulnerable, but I mean, we all are. So we have to get better at knowing where to get reliable information,
That
how to trust
I
it.
think is going to be a sort, would be good for people to concentrate on. How can you really authenticate a source as being truthful? I was talking to a friend the other day and I was saying maybe the generative AI will help us pause and not just take everything that we read at face value, because we know that it's easy to generate fake information and misinformation and even disinformation. So now maybe we're a little bit more skeptical, but then how do we know that it is the true source, that it's truthful? Yeah, that's a challenge out there, I believe.
Yeah. So I think we're seeing it with, young people. They're getting suspicious of phishing attacks, right? Like so a lot of people are getting really good at discerning these things, and it's an
Young
important
people
life skill
and
now.
my mother, so we're all of us are getting better at that, I believe.
That's one example.
Yeah.
Just, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, getting used to talking to people outside of the usual group of experts you work with. Because with this quantum meets cyber challenge, there's several different communities of people that need to collaborate, but haven't really talked to each other in years because they never had to.
Yes.
Things quickly got segmented. Okay, I do what I do, you do what you do. Everything's working fine. When it suddenly comes back to, okay, now we need to rethink the whole everything. Like they don't even know they don't even understand each other, and so it's good to sort of get a bit of breadth of understanding of all the different interesting and important areas, because you never know when you might have to collaborate.
Paul from Grant Bridge Energy asks, how can an organization defend against a quantum-based attack? I'll just take that back. How do organizations defend against cyber attacks today? And then now you add on the quantum-based attack, and I think sometimes it comes down to the individual's cyber hygiene. But what do you think about the quantum-based attacks?
I mean, with cyber-based attacks, it's a lot of just go back to the basics, really adopt a security by design, have it, NIST and other organizations, publish great practices for cyber resilience and cybersecurity. But it's really being proactive about it. There's a workforce element, there's tools and so on. But in terms of a quantum-based attack, it's a lot of the same things again. You have to have your workforce, your employees, your ecosystem sufficiently educated on it so they can appropriately affect a migration to quantum safe tools. So we often just focus on the technology aspect, and that's a really important part, but there's the people aspect.
And people can start doing that today in the current situation with just cyber attacks as they exist today. And if you get that up to that level, then when quantum-based attacks start, at least you're starting from up here instead of down here.
Yeah, you have to first be cyber. You have to, if you're not even doing patch management properly,
yes,
you're not using MFA, then you're not ready to be like, you need to get the basic level of cyber maturity, and then, but we need to be there. It's not like, because that's often an excuse for not being getting quantum safe, and it's something that must be done. But then you can start, you can do a risk assessment. There's a bit of education, there's a risk assessment. Once you've assessed your risk, then you can start some planning, some test migrations, engage with your vendor ecosystem. I would talk to your suppliers.
yes,
Because most of us depend on cloud, or we get apps from third parties. So just have a conversation with them. And we do have questions you can ask them just
Yes.
to
Yeah,
facilitate
you
that.
mentioned that in your
Yeah.
presentation, and I think we'll revisit that,
Yeah.
I think, and so to remind everyone that
Yeah.
that's great. There's some good resources out there. How does Canada compare to India, China, and Russia, for example, in terms of advancements in quantum computing? I think you did allude to it somewhat in your presentation. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of our science output, I think we're punching way above our weight with all of those countries. I mean, China, let's say up until 10 years ago, I think we were ahead of all three in quantum computing. China, on the other hand, raced ahead early in quantum communication. So again, ideas that were often developed in Canada, such as quantum key distribution, but they just made a strategic decision to be the best in the world at
Yes,
quantum
yes.
communication, and they succeeded because they set their minds to it and invested in it. But about 5-10 years ago, China also started focusing a lot on quantum algorithms and the uses, building and using quantum computers. So they're very strong as well. But I mean, I would say Canada is still, at least as strong on the application aspect of quantum computing. The hardware platforms, yeah, I think we're still global players on par with the best people everywhere in the world. But China's investing a lot in sort of integrating all the
Yeah, you
pieces.
mentioned the thousands of
Yeah.
kilometers of the key distribution deployment
Yeah.
in China. So yes.
But overall, I would say we're ahead of India and Russia and most of the world, and holding our own. Certainly, above our weight, like proportionately. But we need to maintain that position. Like, I don't think we should be intimidated because people often say, "Oh, we couldn't possibly compete with China, or we couldn't possibly compete with Google." I was like, "Why not? Like, we have the same population as California, so like, what's really holding us back apart from ourselves?" And our economy is still a substantial fraction of China's. So obviously, we can't do everything they're doing,
Yes.
but why not decide what we're the best in the world at and remain the best in the world at,
Yes.
in addition to hockey and a few other things.
Yes.
Quantum and
Well, we could
cybersecurity.
spend all day
Yeah.
on that subject there
Yeah.
with cybersecurity. Let's see if we can get to a couple more questions here. Nicholas from the OPP asks, even if it isn't possible, I would be interested in a realistic estimate of not only how long we have before quantum computing advances to the point where it can crack the current standard of encryption, but when it would mature to the point that it would be affordable for most cyber criminal organizations and nation states.
Yeah, I think it already is. Like,
Yes, that's what I think. Yes.
yeah, I mean, it takes billions. It's taking billions to build the quantum computers, but once you figured out how to build them, it's a small number. I mean, it's tens of millions, roughly. So that's certainly within the reach of nation state and criminal organizations. Of course, they use cybercrime to get money to then
Yes.
reinvest. So I think money wise, it's not a problem. There'll be efforts to sort of control the export of the technology, but we all know the black hats and well-funded criminals
Yes.
will get access to these platforms once they're commercially available. And we
Yes.
absolutely want them to be commercially available because that's where all the real value add for society will be.
Yes.
When material design companies use quantum computers to find better materials, or be able to build better batteries, or power lines that don't lose energy, and so on, high temperature superconductors, all those wonderful applications in medicine and so on. You want innovators to get access to the platform, which means, and of course you can have your know your client policy,
Yes.
but we all know cyber adversaries will get access. So it's really imperative we make it a moot point and just migrate to cryptography that is resilient to quantum attacks. And then it's just another high performance computing platform from a risk perspective.
Can you tell us about the harvest, how decrypt later attack vector? And how will quantum strategies help with that?
Yeah, I kind of went through it a bit quickly earlier. All the communications, like, you can have a key exchange, encrypt, and then send something using
Yes.
HTTPS,
Mhm.
right? Your health information when you're logging into Health Ontario or whatever. Like, an adversary who has access to that, you're not physically protecting those fibers, right?
Mhm.
So, or maybe you have an adversary who's somehow gotten access to one of the hardware pieces along the way. But either way, we assume, and it's a good assumption, that adversaries can access that data.
Mhm.
It's encrypted. So we're like, I don't care. It's encrypted. They can't
Mhm.
read it.
Mhm.
But if they could record it,
Yes.
archive it, and then in the future start
So, yeah,
decrypting.
and you talked about that in risk assessment. How long does that,
Yeah.
what's the shelf life? What's the security shelf life is? So if that information is only valid for a year or only needed to be secure
Yeah.
for a year, then you take that into
Yeah,
consideration.
like if it's my travel claim information, I'm not so worried.
Yes.
But if it's my, health information, DNA information, stuff that can't be
Yes.
cloned, or if it's a state secret, or if it's a trade secret for my company, then, and these are really critical assets we need to be much more careful with.
I think we might have time for just a few more. When talking about MRIs and other medical diagnostic techniques, there seems to be a need for stronger legislation in privacy and cybersecurity and or stronger enforcement and penalties for bad actors. So what are your thoughts on this topic?
I think, privacy by design, security by design, resilience by design, they just need to be part of our DNA. And they're often pitted as going against each other, but they're not. If you're proactive, you can, protect people's human rights and privacy and so on. Because privacy is not just about keeping everything secret. It's just about people having control over what happens with their personal
Yes.
information.
Mhm.
And people often cook up these scenarios where you have to choose one or the other. And they're usually, the dilemmas don't usually happen because of poor planning and poor design. Like we can design systems where you're in control, you can decide who sees it, you can know, if there's been a breach and these sorts of things and do something about it. So I think we do need all these things by design. I think as citizens, we need to demand them and, in a responsible way. Like of course, we don't want to impede, you know, innovations that can add value and make us safer and, and make us
Well,
healthier, but we can, if we're proactive, still.
but it does take an effort and it does take a decision at an executive level, because I know that's even with working with BlackBerry and RIM in those days when we came in and Mike Lazar, we decided they're going to do security from the very beginning of the smartphone. That was in by design, not as a bolt on later. So it really does take everyone to act on it. I want to end with this question because you mentioned it, you talked about it, and we mentioned it already in answering other questions. Ingrid from Coal Fire Systems asks, do you have suggestions for how to go about creating business case for organizations to invest time and money into becoming quantum ready? And we'll see if we have time for the other following on questions.
Yeah, so there's good resources, like the World Economic Forum has a number of great resources pitched sort of at a high business level. There's the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, FSISAC, has some best practices articulated by some of the world's largest banks. So that buys you a lot of credibility when you go to your CEO or whoever and say, look, World Economic Forum, the world's largest banks and the Canadian Forum for Digital Infrastructure Resilience, our quantum readiness best practices. There's a full pyramid of best practices. This is how you pitch it to your CEO, and others are like, this is how the person who has to do, the crypto inventory, here's advice for them.
Yeah.
So the full spectrum of advice, but a lot of it is pitched towards here's how to articulate the case for
Yeah,
it.
to put together the business case. And then you mentioned in your presentation about the 8 questions to ask your suppliers and your third parties that you deal with, such as your cloud provider and your maybe also your bank. So so there are these templates out there. There are these best business practices there and available.
8 simple human readable questions.
Yes.
And you can ask them to pretty much anybody, and they're kind of like there's no wrong answer type questions on there, so you're not, you don't have to feel like you're being unreasonable by asking these questions. They're just like, do you have a quantum readiness plan? Or
well, I think this is a good place to just put a call to action out to our audience to look at these documents and resources that are available and start asking those questions.
I think it really is imperative that we do that. Because ultimately this is not going to be some top-down edict. It really does need, people need to appreciate the importance of security and resilience and privacy by design for their own lives, for it to become a sufficiently strong political and business imperative. So
Yeah.
that's a really good point.
Well, thank you for this conversation, and thank you, audience, for participating with your questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michele and Sherry. That indeed was a fantastic session. If you want to learn more about emerging technologies and their impact on business strategy, we have an executive sprint coming up in the new year on the topic of generative AI. Details for that program will appear on screen after I wrap up and will also be sent to you by email. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn or visit us at watspeed.uwaterloo.ca to keep up with all of our events, courses, and programs. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful day.